Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Redback Room. Now, I am Kyla Lee Ward, and for those of you who haven't joined us before, the Redback Room is an initiative of the Australian Horror Writers Association, the Australasian Horror Writers Association, where we bring you some of the best and darkest creative minds of this segment of the globe. The unique conditions here have given rise to all kinds of magnificent, horrific creations, and they continue to do so. That is why we bring you writers both established and up and coming. You will hear them read from their own works. Then you will get to watch them squirm as I, Kyla, quiz them about all the little details. And then if you're watching this live, you'll be able to chime in with your own questions. So without further ado, let me welcome Kirstyn McDermott and Angela Slatter. Welcome again to the Redback Room.
Hello.
Thank you for having us.
Indeed.
Now, Angela, what can I say? World Fantasy Award winner, British Fantasy Award winner. Let's see, Australis, Ditmar, and Australian Shadows Awards winner. Her work includes the, I believe it's 3 mosaic novels set in what's termed the sourdough world. Yes, the Verity Fassbinder trilogy of dark urban fantasy. And of course, it came out just this year, the novel All the Murmuring Bones, which I believe is, it dovetails in some way. It's just around the corner from the sourdough stories.
It is. It's set in the sourdough world. There's a little bit of crossover from the Tallow Wife mosaic novel to a character in All the Murmuring Bones.
Yeah, little Easter egg.
Yes.
For that one. And this really quite incredible amount of work is in addition to your PhD.
Yes.
Yes.
A long time ago, yeah.
Yes. And your professional work as an editor and story development. Again, we're very, very happy to have you here.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, I think the first story that I ever read of yours was The February Dragon, the one you co-wrote with Lisa Hannett, all the way back in 2010.
It's a very long time ago.
Yes. But I have just finished a couple of weeks ago reading All the Murmuring Bones, which is gothic, grand, and gruesome in the absolute best possible way. So very impressed.
Thank you so much.
Now, Kirstyn, multiple Australis and Kronos Award winner, Ditmar Award winner, Stoker nominee. And if I read your biography right, you are most recently the winner of the Pettigrew Family Funerals Award. Now, please, you just have to tell me what that is.
That is part of an annual competition run in conjunction with the Hunter Writers Centre, sponsored by a number of different businesses and individuals. And I guess the theme of the contest every year is grief or grieving. So I happened to have an idea for something a couple of years ago, wrote up really quickly. It's a hard word limit of 500 words, I think, if I remember correctly. So they're not long stories. And yeah, it was fortunate enough to win one of the, I think it's one of the top 3 categories of the prizes. So I was very very honoured for that. But it's not what you think, Kyla. It's not a horror story or anything like that at all. It's about climate grief, actually.
Yeah, but what was the trophy?
Oh, there was no, I know, it would have been wonderful to have like a little coffin or something. No, there was no actual trophy, unfortunately, but there was a very nice bit of prize money that I forget what I spent it on. Probably something boring.
Oh, no, that's wonderful. Now, your own PhD explores the female friendship in traditional fairy tales, I believe. And for an astonishing 68 episodes, you have been the writer half of the Writer and the Critic podcast.
I think I've not updated that on my website. We're up to 85 now.
85. Oh.
We just recorded the last one a week or so ago. I need to edit it and get it online, but it will be uploaded very soon. I think it's 85 or 86, something like that. Yeah.
Oh,
it's
that's
a lot.
magnificent.
We had a hiatus, but it's a lot.
It's a real lot. Now, your work includes the novels Madigan Mine, again from 2010, and Perfections in 2012, and the 2015 collection Caution Contains Small Parts. Now, as well as reading all these, I believe the first piece I ever read of yours was all the way back in 1994. I read And the Moon Yelps in Blood Songs issue 3.
Wow, it was one of my very first published stories ever.
No, and I still remember it.
Oh, thank you.
You had talking flowers and guns, it sticks.
I did have to. Yes.
But I am also a great fan of your much more recent novella, Triquetra, that came out on Tor.com in 2018.
Yeah, that was one of my PhD works. So yes.
A Snow White variant, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And I have also read Burnt Sugar. So I believe we're in for another variant now of a different fairy tale. So Kirstyn, if you would like to give us that.
Sure. So this is, it's two extracts from Burnt Sugar kind of run together. Burnt Sugar is a retelling of a fairy tale, which I might as well let you know is Hansel and Gretel, because I think I cut out the beginning, so I should mention that before I start.
Oh no, you should let us guess.
This is from Burnt Sugar. She was our mother, the woman who led us into the woods. I'm almost certain of it. I have only two memories of before. One is the recollection of her large, strong hands about my waist, lifting me up so that I might see the robin redbreast perched on the woodpile outside our window. Her body is soft and smells of fresh baked bread. The sun is warm on my face. There are pretty yellow curtains. As she holds me, she hums a tune which I've not heard since and which I could not, in good faith, reproduce today. In the other, she's feeding me a salty broth. I have a sore tooth or a sore throat or a fever, and it hurts to eat. She blows on each spoonful before holding it to my lips. Open wide, she says, else you'll waste away to shadows. I couldn't tell you the precise flavour of the soup. Some days I imagine it was chicken, at other times I can summon nothing but the greasy taste of mutton to my tongue. In neither scene can I picture my mother's face. I worry that memories wear thin like cloth, that in my desire to hold on to them, in my attempts to retrieve more and more details with which to patch the holes, I'm not carrying out repair work so much as embroidering new threads over the top, embellishing with what seems most meat. My brother, for instance, is adamant that our curtains were never yellow, that they were nothing more than sackcloth hammered in place with rusty tacks. He's equally adamant that the woman was our stepmother. No real mother could abandon her own children like that, he insists, alone in the woods with nothing but a hunk of stale crust in their trembling hands. Certainly not twice. I never bring our father into such conversations, though he led us into the trees as sure as she did. I never ask why his absolution was so readily granted. But she was our mother. and sometimes she was very kind. I'll never know why she and our father abandoned us. By the time my brother and I found our way home from the witch's house, pockets bulging with stolen gems, our mother was dead and buried. From that moment on, all words were my father's to wield, and he found none but ill to speak of her. These days, with the weight and the wisdom of too many seasons behind me, I'm given to suspect foul play. Her death seemed so convenient, his delight in being loosed from the shackles of marriage so bold. The bruises earned in failing to boil water enough for his bath or by darning his socks without due neatness of stitch have long since faded, but I feel their shadows still. I never speak of such things to my brother. He won't hear any slight against the man who raised us, the man who abandoned us twice. And next winter, our father himself will have been in the churchyard for 3 decades, so there's nothing to be gained from that quarter. But I do think he killed our mother. I'm almost certain of it. Despite what our father said when I brought it home from the witch's house, the book isn't bound in the skin of children. It's deer hide, rubbed stark and smooth by countless years of careful, crafty handling, and the pages within of finest vellum. It belonged to the witch, though she wasn't the first to own it, nor even the second, and now it is mine. On the day we came back, our father wrenched it from my tiny hands and, cursing the devil and all the women who cavort with him, threw it into the fire. I expected the book to shriek, to scream bloody murder, but it made not even a whimper. As it burned to ash, the stench of scorching sugar filled our little cottage. My brother closed his eyes and licked his lips. Rubies tumbled from his loosened fists. I vomited all down the front of my apron. The look of disgust on our father's face was short-lived, but I saw it. I see it still. That night, after all the stolen gems had been counted and gloated over and locked away safe in his sturdy wooden chest, our father tucked us into our beds. He stroked our hair and kissed our faces as he bade us good night, his bristled whiskers scratching at our cheeks. All one family again, he told us. And you, Gretel, you be the lady of the house now. My brother fell asleep almost immediately. But I slid my hand under the pillow, seeking out the hard foreign shape I felt beneath my skull. My fingers bumped against unblemished leather, brushed across feathered vellum edges. My skin sparked. And I heard them once more, those familiar bookish whispers curling through my ears with the rustle of late autumn leaves, unintelligible yet soothing all the same, coaxing me as they'd done all those weeks in the witch's house, promises sly and soft. Soon I would know, soon I would understand, soon I would be. I'd wanted to rescue my brother, of course I had. My terror for him and for myself, for the both of us ending up cooked and plated like stray spring lambs, had been real. But that wasn't why I'd pushed the witch into the oven. It wasn't why I'd slammed the iron door with a clang that will echo to my last living breath, or why I'd bolted it against her pounding and her screams. Content with itself, the book warmed its covers against my palm. In the darkness, the smell of burnt sugar lingered. It coated the back of my throat, no matter how many times I swallowed. It lingers with me still, the smell of a witch roasting.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
It's a strange thing. You know what happened, but still, when it gets free, the telling like that gives me chills.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Amazing.
Thank you, Kirstyn. Thank you very
You're
much.
welcome.
That was Burnt Sugar. And that's in the Dreaming Down Under?
It was, yep. So it was first published in Dreaming Down Under by anthology edited by Jack Dan, the first in his Dreaming trilogy. And it's going to be also published as part of a series of chapbooks of each of the novellas that came out of my PhD next year, and then collected in a collected work, I guess, at the end of it by Brainjar Press. So that is something that's happening, gosh, very soon. It's October, so
Yeah.
Where has the year gone?
Oh, that's great news. Oh, well, that's wonderful. All right, Angela.
Yes.
Well, you know where the bar is, but I have faith.
I will do my best. This is a slightly shortened version of one of the fairy tales that's told in All the Murmuring Bones, which are the stories that Merrin uses to sort of navigate her life. 3 children there were in the house, the firstborn a girl to inherit, the middle a boy for the church, and the last another girl, and a grief it would be to her mother if she fulfilled her purpose. The family had argued back and forth, but the order must be respected. They did not get to pick and choose, the children's great-grandfather reminded them. And so the children's mother lowered her eyes and bowed her head. She sat in the nursery day and night, held the baby with her red gold hair, as if to take all the moments she could. When the rest of the family stopped watching her with suspicion, when she felt herself free of their gaze, for who amongst them would defy the patriarch? When women ruled the O'Malleys, there was more give and take, a greater flexibility with rules and boundaries. But the great-grandfather's tenure had seen a tightening of the reins that held his women. Now it seemed he'd never die, and those of his own blood found themselves hoping for his demise. This granddaughter was tired of her bent back and bent knee, of giving way in all matters large and small, and, without ever really knowing when it happened, rebellion flared in her. And so the day before she was due to say goodbye to her littlest, she sent the oldest and middle children to the sea. Take the path, she said, down to the shingle. Be careful not to slip. There's a cave at the far side of the cove. You'll love to see it, love to play there, perhaps find treasure, my sweets. She wrapped them up warmly, for the day was grey and cold. The eldest, Ashlyn, knew better than to question her mother, yet her excitement was tempered by some instinct. The boy, Connor, was more enthusiastic than his sister, not so wary, and the girl said nothing to dampen his spirits. She knew this excursion was important from the tension in her mother's body, from the way her eyes were so dark and hard, and the way her lips pressed so into whiteness. Ashlyn nodded and took her brother's hand. But don't, their mother said, as she adjusted the silver bell necklace on her oldest child's throat, let anyone see you. Let's make it a game. How clever can you be? How quiet and sly, my little mice. So Grania sent those children, she did, down to the pebbled beach. She sent them by the secret ways that all the youngsters of the house knew, but the adults tended to forget. The long dark corridors where no one but the servants went, and only then, rarely. They scampered through galleries inhabited by nothing but killings, for their home had always been made bigger than it was needed. Extensions were created for prestige and to excite envy rather than house any more bodies. They passed by family portraits whose storm-black eyes watched them go, eyebrows seeming on the verge of liftings. Past weapons that had gathered dust and rust, not taken from the walls in anger for years and years. Past tapestries heavy and rich, depicting scenes of the family's history, with sights of the sea, always the sea, and ships upon it, the very things that helped make the O'Malley fortunes. At last, they came to the cliff edge, to the spot where the switchback path began. O'Malley children had no fear of rain nor grey skies, nor fear of the sea either, for they learned to swim almost before they could walk. They were careful on land, found it somehow treacherous the way it sometimes gave way without warning, when it promised such solidity, though the children were wary when they took the path down through the pebble-strewn cove. But when they reached the beach, their steps were once again sure. Closer to the water, they were more certain. They came at last, did the children, to the sea cave, cut deep in the layers of dark basalt. The tide was out, for Grania had paid attention to the hour when she sent her children away. But the entrance was still so small, hardly more than a gap in the rock, as if a mighty hand had pulled the stone up in a curve as easily as the drape of the fabric. Ashlyn got down on her knees and, after the smallest hesitation, it wasn't fear, no, you couldn't call it fear, more a considered caution, crawled inside, followed swiftly by her brother, who suffered no such qualms. It was dark, the space they squirmed through, damp and close and smelling of dead things that the sea had claimed and wouldn't let go. Just when it seemed that they'd crawl forever, Ashlyn was sure the darkness would suffocate them. A weak gleam showed up ahead and a voice trickled through to them. A voice so sweet that it drew them on made Ashlyn forget that she'd ever thought about trying to turn back. Surely there was treasure here, just as their mother had promised. When Ashlyn and Connor could stand once again, they found themselves in a cave, most assuredly, although they couldn't say how far they'd gone. Ashlyn had a sense that the path had begun to slope down at some point. The area into which they'd stepped was large as the formal dining room at the manor, twice over, 2/3 filled with black water, and the other third, a sandy bottom so soft their boots sank. The only source of light was the algae growing on the walls, which glowed blue-green, made their faces look sickly, and showed the creature that sang as it lay in the shadows. The woman's bottom half couldn't be seen, but Ashlyn sensed movement in the water, a shift of the fluid caused by the press of something powerful, teasingly silver, just like a hint or a taste of the truth. The creature, woman, surely, for it was broad-shouldered, heavy-breasted, with long ropes of sable hair, with pearls braided into them. But Ashlyn couldn't quell the suspicion that the woman, thing, was much bigger than any person she'd ever seen. The mouth was wide and filled with sharp teeth, the nose a little flat, the nostrils a little high, the eyes big and black with no white at all, but she clearly saw the children, for she smiled with that wide mouth and beckoned them closer. She stopped singing, and the sweet echoes dropped from a ceiling so high it was lost in shadows, dropped and dripped and trickled down to make ripples in the surface of the pond. Ashlyn thought she'd never seen anything stranger or more beautiful, but she stayed where she was. The silver bell of her necklace seemed to vibrate against her skin. Grania knew the girl was cautious. Connor, who knew what the boy thought? He took the steps needed to bring him within the creature's grasp. The mare didn't look at the boy, but she kept her eyes on Ashlyn, and the girl saw there, or thought she did, something cold and clever, almost admiring with a lick of contempt. Admiration, for the girl was smart enough to stay back. Contempt, for the girl said nothing to keep her brother safely with her. The creature's arms were scaled. Ashlyn noticed that then, and their reach was long as it grasped Connor and drew him in. The nails were more than nails, they were claws, and the thing had no care for keeping the boy calm. The talons dug in further and further, so fast Connor barely thought to scream for a moment. And then he did, and when he did, it seemed he'd never stop. And the walls that had so recently rung with the siren's song now echoed with Connor's last noises. Ashlyn, unfrozen so fast, dropped to her knees and scuttled to the tunnel, which was wetter as the tide had begun to come in, steeper than it seemed going down. As she crawled, rivulets of water poured towards her as she left the strange light of the sea cave behind and wiggled in a panic towards the tiny speck of sunlight above. Did I get it in the time?
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you.
That is marvelous. And yes, it is only one of the many stories that are nested in the greater narrative of all the murmuring bones. All the screaming children.
Lovely.
Do another title, Ange.
I need it on a t-shirt.
Well, thank you, Angela.
You're welcome.
Now, listening to both these extracts, now I can't help notice that they have something in common. So perhaps we might start there with our discussion. What they have in common where I'm sitting is this, and that is children. Could you each tell me why child endangerment lies at the root of both these little tales? Why you think it might, and child endangerment by their own guardians?
Yes. Well, neither of us have children. We should say that straight up.
It's easy to endanger children, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. We both have PhDs in fairy tales and what they mean. The fairy tales, originally were cautionary tales, folk tales, oral stories for everyone. Don't go off the path or you will be eaten by the wolf. It probably won't be a cross-dressing wolf, but it will eat you. When the French salons started to turn them into fairy tales, into written form, they started to be considered as more for children. And then the Grimms sort of codified everything and tidied them up and took out the mothers doing the bad things and made it stepmothers, because as Kirstyn's piece said, how could a mother do it, that thing to a child? So they're all around children, all these stories anyway, and we're just sort of reworking them, I think, and those symbol, the issues of carelessness about children and active endangerment, as you say, active malice towards them. I think they're very rich meat for writers who are interested in looking at stories for more than just fairy tales and girls in pretty dresses, because there's a real darkness in there.
Yeah.
Kirstyn?
I'm trying to think. I generally don't write a lot about child endangerment or children at all, for that matter. But with the fairy tales, it's unavoidable because they're embedded. So I was choosing fairy tales that were very well known, very popular, because the conceit of my project was to write sequels of sorts for these very famous, very well-known fairy tales. You mentioned Snow White before. Kyla, that was Hansel and Gretel. I've done Red Riding Hood, Sleeping Beauty. I didn't end up writing Sleeping Beauty. I had an idea for it and didn't fit. Rapunzel, though.
There's only so much you can do with the protagonist in Sleeping Beauty.
Well, exactly. So there are all stories that came after. So when you're writing a story where one of the most, if not the most significant incident in a person's life happened when they were a small child, as a lot of the fairy tales were, then that's what you're having to write about in your sequel. So these stories are somewhat of a departure for me, I guess, in terms of the content. They're all quasi-historical narratives, because I wanted to set them approximately within the time and locale where the most well-known versions are held. So that was I don't want to write historical fiction. The research, oh my god, the research. But I did. But yeah, that's, I think, for me, for those stories is where the child endangerment came from. I probably wouldn't return too much to that, I think, in most of my work, just because it's not really where a lot of my concern is. Having said that, the novel I'm about to start next year endangers a child, so there you go. Maybe it's seeped in now and I can't get away from it.
That's it.
But yeah, it makes it, I think, when you're working with the darker genres, it's it can be a go-to, because when you're dealing with a vulnerable individual, it is automatically a bolt straight into the emotional core of the reader. You endanger a child, you endanger an animal, you endanger someone who is vulnerable and helpless. It can be done very cheaply, and I don't like it. My personal bugbear is just killing or torturing an animal for the sake of it. It's like, it's so cheap and ridiculous. But when it's done well, as Angela said, it's very rich fodder for narrative.
And I think both of us also are interested in survivors and the stories of survivors, and you can see that in everything I've written. Is that they're stories of survivors and how they come out, things that, and
what they have to do,
and what they have to do to survive. Practically, do I love life enough to do a terrible thing? Yeah.
Now that is something I picked up from all the Murmuring Bones, and that I thought I'd ask you both about, because Kirstyn, you are completely capable of victimizing and traumatizing adults.
Yes. My preferred victims.
Madigan, Mine, and Perfections are both quite torturous masterpieces.
Thank you.
In which characters, all the characters, especially in Perfections, as I recall, they do commit some appalling acts. So my next question is this. Because we have just been discussing fairy tales, where does that line exist? Does it exist? That line that turns somebody into a villain. A fairy tale villain, if you like.
I don't think the line does exist. I think, well, for me, the types of characters I'm interested in writing about and creating and putting into difficult situations, then none of them are entirely good or bad, or they're all complicated. They all have, I hope, very human reactions to situations. And I'm often surprised when someone will say to me in some situation that oh gosh, I hated that character, they were so awful and what they did was so wrong. It's like, oh, but they weren't that bad. It's like they killed 3 people. It's like, oh, all right, okay, maybe that wasn't right. But there's all there. That line is shifting. If there is a line, it is shifting. If you talk about the tone of a narrative, if a narrative is written in a way that it is making that sort of mustache twirling villain, then obviously that is doing something else. But in the sense of, I guess, the people I write about, one of the things that interests me is, I guess, is that line. Where how does it shift? When does it shift? Do you ever get back onto the better side of the line once you cross it? And what do you have to do to shift back? So that all those questions deeply interest me as a writer.
Now, I have to say, Angela, that honestly, my fondness for Mirren increased with the body count.
Excellent.
But yes, is there a line?
I think there's definitely a line, but I don't. I think, like Kirstyn, it's shifting. It's not a line in the sand. It depends on what influences are there, and I'm really interested in characters. Oftentimes at that formative stage, which again, is that coming out of childhood, where you often make decisions and you think you want things for the rest of your life, but you have no freaking clue, because you don't know what the rest of life is going to be like. And I'm really interested, like Kirstyn, in redemption. So if you've done a bad thing, what do you have to do to get back? What sort of thing do you have to sacrifice in order to get back on the right side of the line, or get back to where you can live with yourself without terrible contempt? And the new book that's all the sorry, what's it called? The Path of Thorns. Sorry, Path of Thorns. I write too much. Is basically a sort of Jane Eyre meets Frankenstein sort of a story, and there's a lot in there that the character Asher Todd does that for reasons that at the time seemed very important to her. She's older. She's probably about 25. So again,
you can still be clueless at 25.
You can still be clueless
Believe me,
at 25,
I know.
And depending on your upbringing, the things that have happened to you, So there's a lot that she does for a reason that she then has to get back from, and it's whether or not she can get back from it enough. Like Kirstyn, I love that, that thing with Burnt Sugar, that the girl has done things. She has done things. So where is she in the line now? Where does she stand? Does she get back? Does she want to get back? Or does she just want this book?
She wanted that book
object.
at the time.
This is the object of desire. Does it then rule the rest of her life, whether she wants it to or not? Because also sometimes you do something because you think you want something, then you realize the thing is not quite the thing you thought it was, and you have made bad life choices. So what do you do? How do you get back from this place? And I'm interested in having the line move on my characters, and what do they decide? The Tallow wife, which has a character of Bethany Lawrence in it, she's someone who, because again, it's about free will. What do you want? What do you choose to do? And she constantly chooses the worst thing.
My favorite character.
It's the worst thing. Yeah. So again, I don't actually know if it's the line of right and wrong. It's how do the characters choose? That's what I want to see. I want to see them jump, because I'm cruel and sadistic.
To get back to the point where you can live with yourself, or potentially with your reflection.
Yes.
Now, the book offers power in Burnt Sugar. And I won't give away the precise path to power that the family took. Sorry, I've blanked. You know how it is.
The O'Malleys.
The O'Malleys, yes, that's it.
Yes. Oh, yeah. So I blanked too. So
I won't give that away because it's quite important. The price of power seems to me to be very much entwined with this. And in Kirstyn, in Triquetra, you give the magic mirror a makeover.
I hate that mirror. I've hated that mirror ever since the Disney Hour, because it opened the bloody episodes. I hated that mirror so much. I wanted to just destroy that mirror. That was my sole impetus at the beginning for retelling Snow White. I just wanted to kill that damn mirror.
Well, yeah, I mean, I hate The Little Mermaid, and basically All the Mermaid Bones is my hatred letter to The Little Mermaid.
But sometimes people don't pursue power. Sometimes they're born with it.
Yeah.
Like the two sisters in Perfections, and even like Verity.
Yeah. And again, they don't pursue it.
Now there's a traumatic childhood.
Yes, there is indeed. So every so often I have to reread that for something, for an interview or something, and I just go, oh, what was I doing? What was I thinking? That's very cool. And then I go off and I do it again in the next book. So it's and it's whether people, when they get power, or if they have power automatically, if they use it, how they use it, can they walk away from it? That's something I'm really interested in, that moment of choice. And at the end, at the end of All the Mermaid Bones, you've got this tension between two characters, one who wants the power and one who doesn't want the power, and what wills out, what comes of it, and those decisions. So yeah.
Now, but it's the forms these powers take in both your works that are one of the things that draw me to them. From wherever they're derived, they're so rich and intricate and so embedded in the world, even in the cases where that world is somewhat more recognizable. The Verity Fassbinder stories are set in Brisbane.
They are.
And Kirstyn, both your novels were, at least from my perspective, very much of Melbourne. So how does that change the equation? How do you go about performing such a graft of the fantastic?
Yeah, for me, it's and look, I have written straight fiction, non-speculative fiction. It's somewhat rare because that's not where my imagination tends to go. Even when I think I might write a straight story, at some point it's like, oh, but wait, what if there's a werewolf? I mean, that's not, I've never actually written yes, I have. I wrote a Red Riding Hood story. Oh, these fairy tales, there's not much I can say I haven't done now. But for me, it becomes more important to ground the fantastic into something that's very, very real. I find it as a reader, especially, I'm not a huge secondary world fantasy reader because I really do like a world that I know. Different things can happen in the world. Stuff can happen that's impossible or unusual or create imaginative. But I'm more connected to, I think, the world that I am in, and that's definitely
the historical research.
Hence the historical research. So for me, bringing the fantastical or the speculative element into the story means I feel that I have to ground it very much in the real world so that the reader can believably, digest everything, 95% of what I'm telling them, because it's real and they understand it and they know it and they've been there, or they've been to a place like that, or they know people like that, so that when I put that little 5% in, it's impossible. It's like, okay, sure, I believe everything else, why not? So it's that, and that's how you do the graft. I think there's that, and then the second element is that you have to make the fantastical believable in itself. So it has to follow its own internal logic. It has to be consistent in the way that it manifests, or the effects that it has, or the cause that propels it through. So you need to be, I guess, true and reliable about what you're doing with that. Even if you don't 100% explain everything, it needs to feel cohesive and consistent. And then you ground it in the world that's very much, for me, here and now, and that makes it something that a reader can very easily believe.
Agreed. And I think you start with the familiar, you start with the ordinary, you start with the mundane, get the reader comfortable, and then I like to think of those strange elements as the ringing of a bell. The first time it's really faint when you put something strange in there, and then more familiar details, then a stronger, louder ring, and you're kind of getting them into it, and they start to go, okay, well, I'm curious about this. I believe I'm here. I'm curious about this. I want to know what that is. Oh, yes, I'm going to go with this. So when I was writing particularly West End for the Verity books, it was really important that it read on the page like it looks in real life. And then I could add strange things in there, like Little Venice Cafe and that kind of thing. And the number of readers who were just like, I walk up and down Boundary Road looking for these things, expecting the weird to sort of come out. And the church in Vigil, where there's, sort of the final smackdown between the angels and the siren. That's actually the little church that my uncle got married in. So it was somewhere that, you know, I used to wander around. I used to wander around the Kangaroo Point Cliffs, and I didn't find until after I'd written the book that this is where my uncle had gotten married. It was just somewhere that I, you know, I really loved the look of. So if it felt real to me, then I think it felt real to readers. Yeah, doing it like that.
Marvelous. Absolutely marvelous. Well, now, here's the point where I ask if there's anyone in our audience who'd like to put a question to you directly. You can do it via chat. I'm looking in the chat right now. And in the meantime, you know, I did cut you off a bit there when you were just getting into how much you hated The Little Mermaid. And well, I did too.
Yeah.
I absolutely loathed that story as a child. I'd be hard to put a finger on why even.
Oh, it's the fact that she so readily gives up everything she has for a guy that doesn't even see her, you know, and that also that apparently she doesn't have a soul, so all she can hope for is to become froth on the waves. Yeah, and that her only choice in life is to give up life. You know, she can't possibly go home. So I actually wrote a short story called The Little Mermaid in Passing, which was published in the Review of Australian Fiction a few years back, which is about the sea witch who gets such a bad rap. And it was, you know, there was some stuff about her backstory and how she came to be and what she was using all these parts from, you know, because it wasn't just the Little Mermaid coming and offering her voice. There were all these stupid girls giving up bits of themselves for bad reasons, generally love. And so I sort of thought, you know, she's here, she's in the sea, she's collecting a lot of stuff. What's she doing with it? So I thought she's probably, you know, more practical than just a serial killer who puts things in jars. She's got to have a reason for it. It's not like collecting stamps. So that was sort of the start of my, you know, talking about and working through my feelings about The Little Mermaid. And that is actually one of the stories that I put in a tweaked form to All the Memory Bones, because I wanted the stories that I've already told to feel like the background fairy tale world that Mirren has, and they're the stories she would have been told in this world that's slightly off the side from ours. So yeah. What about you, Kirstyn? Have you upset The Little Mermaid at some point?
Oh, I don't like the Christian Andersen story at all. It's
or any of them.
You know, Disney does an interesting thing with that story. I'm not overjoyed with what they do with it, but it's better than what Hans Christian Andersen gave them.
He had issues. Dude had issues. So
Okay.
I had a vague idea for My Little
Mermaid.
For a Little Mermaid.
My Little
story.
Pony Mermaid.
Yeah, there you go. That's a mashup.
That's a hippocampus.
But yeah, I never really got a story going, because I think it just, I don't know. There's something of it's such a simple, heartbreaking story. And I never really found a way into it. And having read All the Murmuring Bones, I think I can leave mermaids alone. I think Angela's done a tremendous job.
Angela's done a number.
Perhaps when it comes right down to it, the thing about The Little Mermaid is that it does speak to women rather sharp pointedly.
Yeah.
Now, we've got a question.
Huzzah.
We've got a question. He describes it as a slightly odd question. I happen to think it's a very good question. Matthew wonders if you'd like to say a little bit about your PhDs, such as structure and approach and what came out of it beyond a thesis. For example, Kirstyn, you mentioned stories coming out as chapbooks and a collection.
Yes, so both Angela and I did a creative writing PhD, which means we didn't just write a great big academic thesis.
Thank God.
Which means we're both still sane. So I wrote an exegetical component and a fictional component, and they were merged together in the one document. But I have extracted the 7. I did 7 for the PhD itself, but I have a 7th, 6 for the PhD itself. I have a 7th story that didn't get included in the thesis. So those will be coming out as individual chapbooks, and then they'll be collected as one volume called Never Afters. And yeah, that's, I guess I went into the PhD honestly just to get the time and the resources to write this particular collection that I had in mind, which turned out to be quite a different collection once I'd finished it. But I would not have probably found the time to write it without the structure of the PhD and the scholarship that I got for it. It's the largest advance I'll probably ever get for writing fiction. And more importantly, it wouldn't be as good a collection of stories, because without the, I guess, the rigorous nature of a PhD, which is constantly making you, question what you're doing and why, and what the underlying, structure of it is, and the research and all of that sort of stuff, it made it an entirely different book, I think, than what I would have written had I just done it off my own bat. And I certainly would not have had the access to the resources that being part of a university granted me in terms of research and so on. Academic books are very expensive, so being able to get them for free through the library, awesome. It's the thing I miss most about no longer being in academia, actually. It's like every so often I'll find a book or a paper that I'd really like to read. It's like, oh, $200, maybe never mind. I don't need to read that. But yeah, so that was my basic structure. It's 7 novelettes. They're all roughly between, I think 9, and the longest one's about 16,000 words. They're all thematically connected around the ideas of relationships between women, particularly positive relationships that I'm hoping I'm creating in my stories, because then they're few and far between in traditional fairy tales. And as I said, that theme aside, that they also have the structure of being sequels to fairly well-known fairy tales. The least well-known is probably my Bluebeard story, which is probably the most horrific, as you'd expect from a Bluebeard story in the collection. So that's what came out of mine. It took a little bit longer than I thought. I thought I'd have it done in 3.5 to 4 years. It took me a bit over 6, but that's often the case. And in those 6 years, I didn't do that much else. So, and then at the end of it, I kind of collapsed, and COVID happened. So it's been an interesting couple of years post PhD for me. I'm just beginning to pull out of the post PhD slump, I think, which we've probably just extended because of all of the COVID stuff. So, but I'm writing fiction again that's not PhD related and enjoying it.
We look forward to seeing the result. Angela.
Oh God, it's so long since I finished my PhD, which was, I think I graduated in 2012, and I think it took me about 5 years, and I changed topic halfway through, and in the end, the Sourdough and Other Stories collection was my creative work, and I ended up writing an exegesis of 25,000 words about fairy tales, mosaic novels, and how they can be used to create a version of involuntary memory, basically. And that idea that we were talking about earlier about familiarity in the story, and making a reader feel that, oh, I know this place, or I know this story, but it's different. So that was kind of what I ended up doing with that one. So I ended up with a World Fantasy Award shortlisted collection out of that. I'd done my master's a bit before that. which all of those stories in Black Winged Angels were published individually and then published as a collection by Ticonderoga. Like Kirstyn, the PhD helped me because there was a scholarship attached to it, so I was able to, do a lot of writing and access the university. Oh my God, I miss the databases,
Right.
The books, but also really, really the databases and the articles and that kind of thing. So now I'm down to begging friends who remain in academia, just sort of saying, can I please, sir, have a copy of this article?
It would cost me $48 to buy if I wanted to read it on myself.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, that joke about the guy who was arrested for stealing books from the university bookshop. $3,000 worth. Man, I hope he took those 2 books back. So it was helpful, and also like the time the guidance of other writers that I was able to sort of access then, but it also taught me that I didn't want to be an academic, and I think that's the most valuable thing I got out of it. So
yeah, same.
Yeah.
I'm not interested.
There you are, everybody. 2 PhD fairy tales with happy endings.
Survivors, I think.
Survivors.
Well, that brings us right up to time. Thank you again, Angela, Kirstyn. You've been wonderful guests. I've loved talking to you. I'm sure everybody else has loved listening to you.
Thank you, Kyla.
Everybody, thank you so much for taking the time to join us in the Redback Room. I am Kyla Ward. I will see you again in another 2 months. Happy Halloween.
Bye.